I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right. Happy Friday, guys. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Garland Nixon. He is a radio host, and he's also the host of the Garland Nixon Show on YouTube. Welcome back, Garland.
Oh, it's an honor to be amongst the stars here, amongst the big names.
Oh, no. Well, I know it's been a minute, but a lot has happened in reference to foreign policy. And I want to start off in reference to Russia and Ukraine. I'm sure you probably saw this, but I want to get your take on this analysis here from Fiorella Isabel. For those who don't know, she's the co-host of the Convo Couch. Fiorella is actually there in Russia. So she's been doing a lot of reporting there on the ground. And this happened a couple of days ago. She said Ukraine has once again attacked the Moscow City Business Center this morning, the same area they attacked 48 hours ago. 2 drones were destroyed by air defense and 1 other lost control after being disabled by electronic warfare, crashing into the building. And so she actually had a video here. I just want to show really quick here. So there's the building. So this is just the business center. And then she also has a picture here. And then there's another video she had here where you can see where that transpired. And Garland, I want to get your take on this. When I saw this coverage from Fiorella, the first thing I thought is, if they're attacking Moscow City, like the business center, isn't that technically considered to be a war crime?
Well, anytime that you intentionally target civilian infrastructure, it is illegal under the Geneva Convention and various and sundry international conventions regarding war, but all of which are generally pretty much ignored whenever any war starts. But my thoughts on it is generally this. So on the battlefield, where it counts, Ukraine's losing, and they never, ever really had a chance of winning, and they're losing in a most horrific, unthinkable way, right? So they got to do something. So they do these pinprick attacks. A drone hits a building here. The Kerch Bridge, which is the bridge between Crimea and Russia, they hit that with something every so often. They do all of those things, but on the battlefield, they're losing. I suspect either one of two things. It's either we're not getting any victories on the battlefield. We're losing in the worst kind of way. So we've got to do something so that we can put something on the news that gives the appearance that we're having some military success. And or number 2, because if you look at the history of Russia's military strategies, it's very slow and patient and methodical. That's the way they've always fought. People can read von Clausewitz or whatever, but bottom line, that's the way they fight. Moving slow and methodically, right? In World War II, they started in Russia and they ended up in Berlin, slowly and methodically. 1,846 towns and villages they took, one by one, bit by bit. Didn't matter what the casualties are. That's the way Russia fights. And I suspect what they're trying to do, where they're losing dramatically on the field, they're trying to maybe antagonize Russia into doing something different than they're doing. The history of Russia says they ain't gonna do nothing different. They may do some retaliatory missile strikes or whatever, but they have the initiative, and they'll get some PR victories out of it, stuff like that. But it's not going to change the course of events.
Yeah, I think that what's really interesting to me too, how long do you think the US government is going to continue to give billions of dollars to Ukraine and weapons, considering I saw an article earlier today that said more Americans are not happy with all the money that's going to Ukraine. How long do you think they're going to be able to continue to justify this, considering the fact that they're not winning?
Well, it's not really easy. It's hard to predict because now I had read in the last month or two, and somewhere around the Vilnius NATO summit, the infamous summit where all of the memes came out with Zelensky, looking like a janitor and stuff like that. That around that period of time that he had been told, and I can't verify this, but I saw it in a lot of different outlets that he had till the end of the year, that if he couldn't do anything by the end of the year, which he can't, then he would have to start negotiating. But again, to say start negotiating doesn't mean much, because I'll put it like this. If I'm laying on the ground and someone has their foot on my neck, that ain't negotiating. You got to be in a position to negotiate. If you are losing a war, that's called an unconditional surrender more often than not. You have no, let me put it a different way. In order to negotiate, you got to have leverage. You give me this, I'll give you that. Oh, I got you over here. You give me this, I'll stop doing that. We can leverage and we can bargain. But if you're losing and your patrons, the people that are providing you with money and providing you with weapons, say, go get a deal, because we ain't providing you with weapons, then the other side's just going to say, nah, I'm not giving you with a deal. You're going to run out of weapons and stuff anyway. Let's see if they'll keep giving it to you. So you can either sign this unconditional surrender now or wait until you run out of weapons.
Yeah. How do you feel about the legislation that actually it passed in the House, but it did not pass in the Senate, where they were actually asking for some type of oversight in reference to the spending that's going towards Ukraine? How do you feel about seeing people like Bernie Sanders actually vote against that? I think Rand Paul's position in reference to voting against it, he said that something about he wanted to have the same inspector, I guess, that was under the Obama administration. But how do you feel about the fact that even Bernie Sanders, someone who had at one point in time said that he was against the wars, how do you feel that even he voted nay? It feels like they're trying to hide something, like they don't want the American people to see where all this money is going.
Well, I think what you have with Bernie Sanders, what you have with the Democratic Party now, is simply a machine that operates uniformly. Nobody's going to go against what they're told. They all get together in a room and they say, we have to do X, and everybody says squad Bernie Sanders. So really, doesn't matter if it's Bernie Sanders or doesn't matter if it's the most right-wing maniac such as Menendez or whoever in the party. It doesn't matter. Bernie, when the party says we're voting on X, and Bernie's not even a Democrat, but it doesn't matter, because he's part of the team. And when the team says we're going to do this, there is not a ethical or a moral argument to be made that can support saying we don't want someone to look at what we're doing and the money we're spending to figure out if we're doing it right and it's going to the right places. There's no ethical argument to say we must stop that immediately. The only argument that they have is we don't want to do it because the Republicans want it. That's it. The Republicans want to look. And if you look at the ethics of that particular dynamic, that ain't a very good argument. The Republicans are saying we want to look and see where the money's going. And the Democrats are like, oh, no, we don't want to do that. I don't know, because Putin will win or something if we are. Who knows? But bottom line is, it's as you said. If you look at what happened with Hunter Biden and that whole circumstance, you understand that Ukraine is an ATM, that Ukraine is a money laundering operation, and they can't afford for somebody to look into a money laundering operation.
No, I agree. Now that Devin, I don't know if you saw the interview with Devin Archer and Tucker Carlson, but now that he has come forward, do you think that Hunter Biden or Joe Biden will be held accountable in reference to the business dealings with Ukraine?
No. I don't think they can be held accountable. The reason being, I also interviewed a guy whose name is Andrei Telezhenko. Andrei Telezhenko he worked for the U.S. Embassy. He also was the assistant to Viktor Shokin. That was the prosecutor general, the equivalent to our attorney general, that Joe Biden got fired. He worked with him. He worked with Blue Star Strategies, which is the deep state company that got Hunter Biden in there. This guy was in the middle of all of it. And basically what he said was, yeah, that's intelligence stuff. That basically, I mean, think about this. So Hunter Biden goes on the board of Burisma. Who was on there with him? And does this sound conspicuous? There were a couple of other people on the board. One of them was Cofer Black, former director of counterintelligence for the CIA. What the heck is a CIA guy doing on the board of Burisma? The other guy was the former prime minister or president, whatever it is, of Poland. So Burisma comes in, you know, basically the U.S. overthrows the government, and now you got all of these creeps coming in there, filling their pockets. But Hunter Biden was also instrumental in funneling money to these 46 bio research labs. Hunter Biden was involved in getting the money there too. So Hunter Biden, I'll put it like this. If there was a stream of corruption going through, Hunter Biden was just reaching over every now with his glass, getting a glass of it and drinking his fair share. That's all it was. So can they go after Biden? What were Pelosi's kids doing there? What was, what's his name? Mitt Romney's kids doing there? They were all in there. They basically, it's almost like somebody on the street like knocked an old lady over and everybody came around and started stealing her wallet and her jewelry. And once they overthrew this country over, they all came in and they just picked the bones of it like vultures. But the intelligence community was deeply involved in it. So they can never really touch Hunter Biden and Joe Biden for this.
Crazy. This is crazy, crazy stuff. Another thing I want to bring up, and I'll talk about the story later on tonight, but in reference to Gavin Newsom and Joe Biden. So I saw that there's going to be a debate between Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom. I know we talked about Gavin Newsom earlier on your radio show, and it does appear that there is some type of shadow campaign that is happening with Gavin Newsom. Otherwise, I don't know why he would agree to doing this debate. Do you feel that the Democratic Party, because of the information that has been released about Hunter Biden and now Joe Biden and Joe Biden's cognitive ability, do you feel that that is why they are leaning more towards or trying to maybe swoop in someone like Gavin Newsom, because they're afraid the more information that is revealed, it's going to be bad for Joe Biden and Trump could win again?
Yeah, I think you're right about all of those things, that there are a confluence of issues. Number one, Joe's obvious cognitive decline. I mean, at this point, who could Joe debate? You know, so I mean, you know, he can get away with the DNC and not debating RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson or whoever. He can get away with that because he runs the operation. But at some point, he's going to have to debate someone, and he can't do it. So I've said for a while, as I saw him slipping and falling every other day, you know, getting confused, walking right out in the middle of, you know, he's being interviewed and he just gets up and walks out of the interview. I saw all of these things. I'm like, they ain't running that guy because they can't. They're hiding him right now. And let's face it, Kamala Harris is not an option. So I'm reading that. Here's an article right here. Gavin Newsom looks like he is running for president. Here's another one. Ron DeSantis accepts Gavin Newsom's challenge to debate on Fox News. And here's a key one. After Kamala bowed out, Gavin Newsom steps into DeSantis debate. In other words, Kamala ain't going to be the answer. They know they can't run Kamala. They understand what they have with her, but she's a black Sarah Palin, in my opinion. She's Sarah Palin. She's the Democrats' equivalent of Sarah Palin, right? And so now it certainly appears as though many of us have thought for a while, who are they going to get? They're going to get Gavin Newsom. They're going to stick him in there, and they're going to, if somebody challenges them too closely, they'll just steal it, and there's their guy, Gavin Newsom. It looks pretty obvious to me. I mean, what do you think?
I agree. He's also, did you know he's related to Nancy Pelosi?
Wouldn't surprise me. You know, a quick story about Nancy Pelosi. You know, she's from Baltimore.
Yep.
And her father was Tommy D'Alessandro. He was the mayor of Baltimore. Tommy D'Alessandro ran for governor, but he had to stop. He had to drop out. Anybody can look this up. It's online. He had to drop out because of his connections to the mafia. And let me go one further. I had a client. And they named the guy who was his business partner, who had so he had a business partner, a close partner. This guy had ties to organized crime. You know what that means. And so, needless to say, when they started snooping around, asking a few too many questions, D'Alessandro had to drop out, right? The guy who was his business partner eventually died, right? That guy's wife was one of my clients at one point. She was a
Oh
client.
my
I'm not going
God.
to say anything about that. I'm just saying the wife of D'Alessandro. I used to go to her house. The wife of D'Alessandro's, which is Pelosi's father's, his. Let's just say he was alleged to be involved in organized crime, and he might have spent some time in jail here or there. His that guy had passed away, but his wife was actually one of my clients, and I talked to her. I ain't say anything, just saying I talked to her at some points. So I know
Wow.
about it. Yeah, so most people don't know that there are those who, let's just say, suspect that Pelosi's father was a mob figure. There are a lot of people that suspect that. Enough people that he had to drop out when he was running for governor. So that
That
tells
is,
you something about Nancy Pelosi. I'm just saying
yeah,
it's
that
in the
does.
blood.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Another thing we've been talking about recently, there was that coup recently in Niger. We were talking about that. Lately, we've been seeing a lot of other countries choosing to push back against Western imperialism, like people rising up in Niger telling like France, like, no, get out of here. We don't want you here anymore. They're stealing their resources. They've been, getting uranium from them. They've been stealing gold from gold mines as well. Do you think that we are seeing a shift in reference to having a multipolar world? And do you feel like BRICS is a big part of that? And where do you see this going in the future in reference to the United States? Where do we fit in all this?
Oh, there's no question that there's a sea change. There is like a change going on in the world now that hasn't gone on for 1,000 years. I'll be honest, for many centuries. You've got Russia, a country that's been trying to integrate itself into Europe for the past 300 years, who has just completely given up on that and pivoted east. And it's the largest country in the world with like more natural resources than anyone. So for that country to pivot is major. So you have a coalition, a powerful coalition of countries that I refer to as the Eurasian coalition, which is Russia, which is mainly Russia and China are the anchors of that coalition. But that coalition includes the global south, which is Latin America. It includes the Middle East. It includes Africa. And now what's happening is the Africans are waking up saying, you know what, we're sick and tired of it. You guys are taking our stuff. And so now people are like, coup. Is a coup bad? Not necessarily. If you have some people who are stealing everything. Let me give you an example. I got a meme that I put up, right? Gold mines. Mali, which is one of the countries that is in the francophone, is one of the ones that France dominates. Mali has 860 gold mines and 0 tons of gold in its gold reserve. France has 0 gold mines and 2,436 tons of gold. Why did I put those two things together? Because that's what they're doing. They're stealing it. You have 12 countries in Africa. Now, what sense does this make? You have 12 countries in Africa. 50% of their gross domestic product goes into French banks for storage. In other words, they're storing it forever. They're never going to get it back. So these countries are saying we're tired of being robbed. They see the world changing. They see people pushing back against imperialism. And they're like, you know what? It's time for us to make our move now or never. That, we've had enough. They've created a continent of people who got nothing left to lose.
Yeah, no, that's true. I was telling people too, there's a guy called Second Thought. I'm not sure if you've ever seen his channel, but he talks a lot about not just anti-capitalism, but also about some of the global issues that we have. And he actually woke me up to this issue. I didn't realize this for a long time, but apparently some of the countries in Europe that do have like the universal programs, they give everybody health care, they have like, unlimited vacation, et cetera. I didn't realize that the reason why they're able to do some of the things they do in those countries is because they don't necessarily exploit the workers in their country, but they exploit workers in the global south. And I learned so much more. Like after watching that video from him, I started doing a little bit more research, and I found out about companies like H&M, a lot of these companies that a lot of you guys may like, retail companies, how they have all these people working in these factories in the global south, and they're barely paying them anything. And I'm curious if BRICS decides to move away from the US dollar and decide to create their own currency, so to speak, which they're talking about doing that. Do you think that there will be any type of change in reference to that exploitation that's happening to workers in the global South?
I think that's part of it. There are a chain of events. There are a series of events that are happening that's going to affect that particular dynamic. BRICS, I don't know how soon it's going to go with it's going to have an alternative denomination of money, but one of the things that is happening is in the immediacy, because that could take a while, and I don't even know if they're going to vote to do it here in the next month or so when BRICS meets, but more and more countries are starting to do business in their own currencies. So now, even with that, you got countries saying, okay, you got this, I got that, let's figure out how we can do our currencies, and we can do, and say what that does is this. If you've got all of these countries that are able to figure out how to do business in their own currencies, they don't have a need for a single currency. They don't have a need for a single dominant currency because they've already had the experience. If one country has a dominant currency, it can dominate everybody else and simply say, if you don't do what I tell you, I'll cut you out of my currency. So you've got more and more countries working on figuring out how they can do business in their own currencies. And not to mention this, or to mention it, it strengthens the currencies. So now people are buying and selling in whatever my currency is, then my currency has a greater value. My currency is stronger. So I think they're going in that direction. It's funny that with all the projection, the U.S. says China wants to dominate everybody. They want to make the yuan the currency. They want to, and China said, nah, we don't want that. We don't want our currency to be the global currency because that makes it more difficult for us to manage it, for us to decide how it goes up and down. If their currency is the global currency, the U.S. may go in and say, let's buy a bunch of yuan, let's sell a bunch of yuan, let's do something to affect the yuan. It's out of their control. So I think that the countries like Russia and China do not want that because it allows malevolent forces such as the U.S. to take actions to hurt them. Yes, there are definitely economic changes. It's not going to happen overnight. It will be slow, but one of the things that a lot of Americans are afraid of is, will we just have a currency collapse or whatever? Well, I'll put it like this. The British Empire crashed and the pound sterling crashed and they made through it and they were all right. But what they had to do, what the Brits have to do after the Suez Canal crisis in 56 or whatever it is, and the pound sterling crashed, everything didn't work out. You know what they had to do? They had to stay home and handle business at home. They couldn't afford the bases and all the things around the world. So I think what has the potential and what is likely to happen with the U.S. when we have some issue with our currency and some issue with significant inflation is we won't be able to borrow, we won't be able to live off debt, and we won't be able to finance this giant war machine. And I personally think that's a good thing.
Another thing I was thinking about too, in reference to the US dollar, if those countries did move away from the US dollar, that means that the United States government cannot sanction those countries anymore. And then that also brings about this question in reference to manufacturing and production in the United States, which I know they've said before that manufacturing is coming back to the US, but it's not the way that it was back in like the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, so to speak. But eventually, I feel like the US is going to have to start heavily making our own products. And I say this because I can't go through one store without seeing a product that is made somewhere else, not in the United States. And I think it was a big mistake for people like Bill Clinton to implement NAFTA and to send those jobs overseas and to close down those factories and things like that. Of course, it started happening before Bill Clinton, but I felt like he escalated that. I think that was a mistake because I don't think a lot of people realize just how many products we get from other countries. And we talk about the automotive industry. It's not even just, oh, we're getting parts from Japan or China. We're also getting auto parts from Mexico, which a lot of people don't realize. So I feel like the US is going to have to bring back some force of manufacturing where we are at the point where we can just depend on our own country. But right now, I feel like we're not at that point.
Yeah. And if you think about it, the last couple of presidents, Donald Trump said it, Joe Biden said it. They said, we're going to bring back good jobs, good, well-paying jobs. What they were saying is we're going to reindustrialize. We're going to bring back industry. That's where the good paying jobs are, et cetera. Right. But there's a problem with that. Because we live in a neoliberal financialized system, one of the things that happens in this particular economic system is that the people at the top prey on the people at the bottom. So they make the cost of living so high that it makes it cost prohibitive to have a factory here. If you got a factory here, you have to pay your workers so much in order for them just to be able to survive that you can't make a profit. So we've created a dynamic through creating an economy that preys on the people at the bottom, that preys on the working class, that we can't at this where we are now. How are you going to reindustrialize where someone is in a country where they have things paid for them, where they have health care, things of that nature, right? Now, when you have a factory, you don't have to pay the health care for them, which is a major cost. Now you come to the United States, the first thing you got to pay for all of these people is health care. That eats into your profit. Then they got to make way more than the guy in the other country because everything's so expensive for them. They got to pay for their student loans. They got to pay for this and that. We have priced, the cost of living has priced out the United States as a competitor for labor, for industrial labor. And so now we are simply we're simply a financialized economy, which means there's nothing for the little person there. And if you think about it, I'll put it like this. If you think about you have a business, right? You got to pay for making your product, right? Which is your factory and your resources and all those things, right? B, you have to pay, but you can't control those costs. Yeah, you got to pay for whatever it costs to buy the building and whatever it costs to buy the steel or whatever, right? B, you got transportation, advertising. You got to pay for that, whatever it costs. You can't necessarily control that. You got to pay. So those two costs are set, right? C, what do you have? Labor. So how do you get more profit? You pull it out of labor. If your worker Garland works for your company, and in that factory, he makes $100 an hour. That's how much profit he makes. The question is, how much does Garland get out of it? Does he get $2? Does he get $50? Does he get $99? That's where it all is, in that labor. How can you pull more money out of that labor? And what they realized was, well, we'll just go to this country over here where we can pay them less. And the labor, we get more profit because we've pulled more out of the labor part. Well, what they've done is to created a situation here where even for me just to survive, I got to get 75 of those $100 that I'm making. And they got 25 left. It ain't enough. Now they have discovered, I will add this, that's in traditional, that's in your traditional industrial or commodity economies. What they have discovered, another little trick here, and that is, so I can, as a company, I can make money by squeezing more out of my labor, by screwing over my workers more, right? But there's another way in a financialized economy. Now I make my profit. I take that profit and buy back my own stock and artificially increase the value of the stock. I haven't done anything for the company. In the old days, in the old industrial, or in China, in some of these industrial companies, what do when they make a profit? They put money in research and development. They build new buildings. They can make more things, right? Here, if the company makes a profit, they buy back their own stock. That increases the value of the stock. And the few people, the ones that are getting dividends, the one whose salary is based on the stock, they make more money. So they've figured out a way to even take the profit and squeeze money out of the profit. But then no money goes back into the business. But they don't have to put money into the business. You know why? Because when they run that business aground, the government's going to bail them out. So now government bailouts so that is the end now of a financialized economy. You run your company, you squeeze every penny you can out of labor, so you get all of that. You buy back your own stock. That formula doesn't work, and your company crashes, and then the government bails you out. So that's the fault. The only reason these companies in America that are here are any value at all is because everybody knows that when they eventually crash, which they will, that the government's going to bail them out.
Well, one thing I'm curious about, Garland, when you were growing up, was it more common for people to feel like they had to go to college? And I asked that question because at least for like my generation, that was heavily like fed into us when we were in high school. If you want to have a decent wage, you have to go to college, right? So a lot of us, we went to college, and then a lot of these jobs were not available, after the fact. These fields do change. Technology has changed some of these jobs and some of these industries. But when you were growing up, was that more common where people felt like they had to, or were there more options available to them?
So I grew up in the time where we were transitioning from the industrial economy to the financialized economy. So there were a lot of people who still felt as though they could get a job. A lot of our parents, were in the industrial economy. My dad, he wore a hard hat. He was a longshoreman, right? So there were still people who, based on their parents' experiences and what they saw, they felt like that they could get a job in the industrial economy and they could make a decent living. And of course, that all kind of melted away. So there were a lot of people in my generation that were caught in between. They didn't get the college that they needed because they could make it without that. And then as the economy started to change, they were kind of left out and they ended up just not having much. And, those who could get a job, working on a road crew for the county or something like that, okay, they would survive and, they'd be working class to working poor. But yeah, so I put it like this. I had the misfortune of observing the transition. And another thing, let me say this, because I live next to the bay. I do a lot of boating, right? I'm always around. I grew up near the bay. And I remember when you go out on a boat, there were boats everywhere. Everybody could afford a boat. And all the middle class people, a 16, a 18, a 20-foot boat. Everybody had those things. They were everywhere. 4th of July, you could walk across the bay with boats, right? Now you go out, very, very, people can't afford it. People can barely afford to pay their bills, much less the luxury of a boat.
Yeah, I know it's very different when I hear people tell these stories, how like they were able to just have one income in the home and they bought a house and they had kids, and it's very different from, I think, from my generation, where pretty much both people have to work within the house. But I'm curious, I have one more question for you in reference to the economy. Do you think, coming into the 2024 presidential election, I know a lot of the polls right now are showing that most Americans care about the economy. Do you think that people are going to care enough for that to affect how they vote in 2024?
Yeah, always. There's a book. It used to be called The 13 Keys to the White House by Professor Alan Lichtman. I know him. I haven't talked to him in years, but I used to know him and his family well over at American University. It was called The 13 Keys to the White House, and he changed the name of it to The Keys to the White House. But basically, he had 13 things that he went through. And if these things, basically, whichever party got 7 of them won, they applied it back to every election back to 1860, and it picked the winner every single time. So the bottom line is, what he was able to demonstrate is this: people vote off certain things. And it doesn't matter if you're in the middle of World War II. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of the, whatever, some kind of a cultural revolution or change in the 60s or 70s. It doesn't matter. People always vote on the same things. So yes, you people are going to vote on their pocketbooks. But there's some interesting things in there, including, has the incumbent party had any major victories or disasters in foreign policy, questions like that. But a big part of it has to do with the economics. So yeah, people vote. That's why I've always said this: more often than not, when you see 2 people running for an open White House, not always, but more often than not, the person with the least foreign policy wins. Reagan over Carter, G.W. Bush over Gore, Clinton over, on and on, over Bush Sr., Obama over McCain, on and on and on, right? Trump over Clinton. You can go one after the other after other. Most of the time, the person with the least amount of foreign policy wins when the White House is open. And why is that? Because the person with more foreign policy experience focuses their campaign and their platform on foreign policy, and they lose because the person who focuses on domestic policy and dollars win. But think about what I just said. Obama had 0 foreign policy. Clinton, when he was against Bush Sr., 0. Reagan, he was a governor against Carter, 0. Bush Jr. versus Al Gore, 0. Trump versus Clinton, 0. The person with the least foreign policy experience is going to talk about domestic policy and dollars, and they're going to win.
So what does that mean for candidates like RFK Jr. then?
Well, I'm saying during an open White House, once let's say once the president has won both of his terms most of the time, then that, but I would say this, well, okay, here's what I say about RFK Jr. The reality is this, the Democratic Party is so corrupt that there's no possibility. I mean, I think he should run, and anybody should run. They should challenge him all they want to, great. But I don't see a possibility. I mean, I believe that if RFK Jr. got every single vote, every Democrat in the United States voted for him. It was the first in history, a unanimous victory for him. He got everything that when they went to the convention, they give it to somebody else. They go in the back room and they vote and they say, yeah, well, okay, he did okay, but we think this person will represent us better. And they give it to someone else. They don't care. They literally argued in court that they could go in the smoke-filled back room and pick whoever they wanted to. And if you think about this, if you and I had been robbing banks, and somebody else is going to come around, we can't afford for an honest person to come snooping around because they're going to find that we're out there, we're crooks, aren't they? Yeah. So the level of corruption, the corruption is so deep, it's so endemic, it's so ubiquitous in the Democratic Party that they can't afford for an honest person to start opening doors because skeletons are going to start falling out. So they cannot possibly allow anyone to start snooping around the Democratic Party, looking at the FBI, for God's sake. They can't have that. So they can't, even if they lose, they would rather lose than have a person who's at least fairly honest come there, because if somebody started snooping around DNC headquarters, they'd all end up in jail. Every last one of them would be in Leavenworth.
Well said. Yeah, I asked that question because I hear people say this every election cycle, that they care about the economy and et cetera. But then all it takes is for the media to tell them, well, you don't want to get Trump again. And so they just they'll vote for Joe Biden out of guilt or out of fear. And that's just something I'm curious about, if people are really gonna really stand firm on that this time around. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we are heading for some nasty economic times, for some bumpy economic times. And that means that the Democrats are toast. Let's not forget 1990, what happened after the Iraq War. George Bush Sr. had a 90% approval rate. 90% approval rate. 1 year later, he lost in 90. And that was in 91. 92, he lost. How do you lose? Why? We went into a recession. A 90% approval rate ain't going to save you. If we go into a recession, you're going to lose. We went into a recession. I think we're heading in that direction. Things are not looking good. The Democrats are going to lose. I just see no way. I mean, will they steal it? I don't know. They'll probably charge me with a crime for just mentioning that they might steal it, but that ain't going to stop them from stealing it.
I hear you. Well, Garland, before you go, where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me all over the place at Garland Nixon on Twitter, Garland.Nixon on Instagram. I can give my email. Email me, garlandin@gmail.com. I ain't hard to find. I'm on the radio. I'm doing Pacifica right now, which I may be retiring from Pacifica very shortly. Sputnik, I'm all over creation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Garland.
All right. Thank you. Certainly appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come and speak with your audience.
Bye. All right, guys. I hope you learned some things there from Garland Nixon. It's always great to have him on. If you're not watching his YouTube channel, you're missing out. He talks a lot about foreign policy and he has really great guests. And then also you can catch him on the radio show too. So like he's on Sputnik and he's on Pacifico. So definitely check out Garland Nixon there. Okay, we have a lot to discuss tonight. I do have a very, very recent update in reference to this Max Blumenthal story that I was going to cover tonight, because I did just see the conversation that he had with Jimmy before I went live. So I do have a very recent update in reference to that. And I also actually have a bonus news story tonight as well, which I forget the individual's name, but thank you so much for reminding me, because I forget to cover that story. And I think a lot of people need to hear about this because it's a little strange and a little suspect. But let's go ahead and start out by shouting out Sabby patrons, and then I'll go to the super chats, and then we'll go ahead and dive right in. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, there's also Sabbies, and of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much. And I want to give you Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Tori. Welcome, welcome all. Okie doke. What are we talking about tonight, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, let me do the super chats first before I forget. Sorry. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, how to sober. You got the patient dumping story. Good. Yes. I have 2 stories tonight that are wild, like just beyond belief. I never thought I'd see this before, but yeah, there's 2 of them that are just crazy. Thank you, Roger. Members of worker co-ops will never outsource. Thank you for that. And thank you for this as well, Roger. That's why you replace corporate with co-ops, Garland. Thank you. And thank you, Perry. Please tell me where all that tuition money really goes. Well, having worked in higher ed, some of the presidents of these universities are making a lot of money. When I worked at Boston University, this is public information, by the way. When I worked at Boston University, the president, Bob Brown of Boston University, was making $2 million a year. And he doesn't pay for his house because like the university covers the house of the president of the university. So just keep that in mind. He was making more than the president of Harvard University. BU's not even a top 10 school. Okay. And thank you so much for the super sticker, Donald King. Thank you. And that's public info. So I don't mind sharing that. If you Google it, Massachusetts actually releases a report every year that lists all the university presidents and their salary. So kudos. Let me get that comment on Rockfin, Eric, and then we'll get started. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Diane. I love you guys and wish I could do more. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate that. All right. What are we talking about tonight? We're going into the weekend with a bang, especially since I'm not here Sunday. I'll miss you guys Sunday. I'll be traveling again. All right. So tonight, we just had Garland Nixon here. We're also going to discuss RFK Jr., Snubs, Max Blumenthal. And I have a recent update in reference to that story as well. We're also discussing Barack Obama and Gavin Newsom alert, something you need to be paying attention to there. We're also going to discuss Louisville patient dump. I'm not even exaggerating. This story is wild. A couple of you emailed this story to me. That's how I found out about it. But this is crazy. And I also have a bonus story about that U.S. soldier that has been detained in North Korea. That's another wild story. So we'll get into all of that. But first, I want to go ahead and get started with this story here about Barack Obama and Gavin Newsom. If you have not heard, apparently, it has been reported that Barack Obama has had a discussion with President Biden that he is very much concerned that Trump could win again. In fact, he was quoted as saying Trump could win. So you see, these are the things happening behind the scenes. I want to go ahead and get into this clip here first from Fox News, and then I have an article I'm going to dive into from The Guardian as well.
Former President Barack Obama has a warning for President Biden. According to the Washington Post, Obama had a private lunch with Biden in June, where, quote, Obama voiced concern about Donald Trump's political strengths, including an intensely loyal following, a Trump-friendly conservative media ecosystem, and a polarized country, underlining his worry that Trump could be a more formidable candidate than many Democrats realize, end quote. Vanity Fair summed it up with this headline: Barack Obama is also scared, blah, blah, that Donald Trump could win another term.
Now, let's pause here for just a second. Now, why is this important? Last election cycle in 2020, I don't know if you guys remember, but there were rumblings of Barack Obama telling Joe, like, Joe, you don't have to do this. There were rumblings of Barack Obama not really wanting Joe Biden to run for president. Now, I don't know if that's because maybe behind the scenes, Obama had already started to see some of this cognitive decline that Joe Biden may have been experiencing. Not certain, but could be a possibility. Or maybe because Obama didn't think that he could win. So these things have a way of getting out. And here we are again. The reality is, whether you like Donald Trump or not, he is increasing in the polls. Every indictment actually helps him in the polls. And it hurts Ron DeSantis. We'll get into that in a little bit second as well. But this is something that you cannot ignore and cannot be avoided. And the reality is, based on the polling right now, if the election were today, Donald Trump would win. Now, how do they solve that? They make it so that Donald Trump is charged with the felony and he cannot run for president. That's one thing that they can do. Or the donors and the media will find a way to pump up Ron DeSantis to make him appeal to be more desirable of a candidate. Because let's be real, Ron DeSantis is not really desirable as a candidate. He's not charismatic. He just doesn't seem, he's not warm and fuzzy with people. He's just not, he doesn't have that. And a lot of people had that. Bill Clinton had that charisma. Barack Obama had that charisma. Joe Biden had a little bit of that charisma when he wanted to, but that is very key. Hillary Clinton did not have that charisma, right? So let's go on.
Congresswoman Claudia Tenney of New York said this.
President Obama really has a stake in Joe Biden staying there. You know, many people think that he's the guy behind the scenes. Let Joe go, let him get out of this thing without, by saving face.
But back when Biden announced his candidacy in April, Obama tweeted, "Support, let's get to work." The latest New York Times poll has Trump and Biden now in a dead heat. Molly Hemingway is a Fox News contributor and editor-in-chief of the Federal.
Now, I want you to look at this poll for just a second. Keep in mind, more than likely, this poll does not include, the third party and independent candidates. Just keep that in mind. Just Donald Trump and Joe Biden. This is coming from the New York Times. I actually believe if the matchup were today, I actually believe that Donald Trump would win, not Joe Biden. But that's just me.
Hemingway is a Fox News contributor and editor-in-chief of The Federalist. Mark Penn is a former Clinton advisor and poll expert. Great to see you both. Molly, I'll start with you. So Obama has gone from let's get to work to let's freak out. Why?
I think it is a reasonable thing for him to be concerned about. Even the 2020 election was remarkably close, with it coming down to about 40,000 votes across 3 states. And that was during a campaign where Biden had an excuse for why he couldn't be out running a campaign because of COVID. And you had the media suppressing all sorts of stories about the Biden family business, which are now coming to light. And you didn't have the actual, track record of what was happening in a Biden presidency, which a lot of Americans feel is not anywhere near where they want to be economically, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of crime, in terms of the southern border, all sorts of issues that now Biden would have to defend. So Obama's right to be concerned, I think.
So, Mark, do you
Right, because now things are different. Now we've had Trump and we've had Biden. So it is going to be really interesting to see what happens here. But it's also very odd to me that Barack Obama continues to be this involved in reference to the presidency. He's still there behind the scenes. He's still calling shots as well, like he did for the 2020 election. Let's be real there, how he told people to drop out of the race. It is very strange to me that he is still this attached to the White House and still calling shots, so to speak. So that's someone you still need to keep your eye on. Even though he's not president, he's still very active.
think Obama's also right to be concerned from your perspective on the left side of the aisle? And if so, what would you do to turn things around?
Well, there's no question that this race right now is a toss-up at best. Some polls like mine show Trump a couple of points ahead, others a couple of points behind, the New York Times dead even. The biggest problem that President Biden has is his job rating is low in the low 40s, and his rating on inflation is about 35%. So what does President Biden need to come back and have a lead instead of a toss-up? A better economy. That clearly is the number one issue. It is the number one deficit that Biden has. He's got to both, I think, move somewhat more to the center to get moderate voters. Look at that huge undecided in this race, even though both candidates are universally known, says a lot of voters don't know, which one they would choose in this case. But the economy is the big issue that he really has to fix. And he's got a chance that a year from now, the economy will be better and inflation will be lower.
So you know what I
We'll see. What's really interesting to me is when they say that he has to get moderate voters as if Joe Biden is far left. He's not far left. I wish they would stop spewing this lie. It's really interesting to me as they make it seem like it's not a lot of moderate people that voted for him in the first place, because the reality is it is. There were a lot of us that sat out. There were a lot of us that voted third party or just walked away from this completely. So they continue to spew this to make it seem like that Joe Biden is this far left. They also considered to call him a communist or socialist. They're all over the place.
I always admire about you. You have such transparency around these issues. I mean, you really, and you're a polling expert, so you get that these numbers, they've been around for so long that they're more than just stubborn. My question for you, just to put this back on you, Mark, is why can't other Democrats see that?
Oh, look, I think some are. Look, I think the party is rallying around Joe Biden. You see his numbers going up.
Well, that's because he won't sit down.
They're all in on Biden too. I don't think there's any question about that. But they're also realistic. I mean, that's why they went out with Biden economics. That's why they're defending everything that's going on with Devin Archer and others. That's why they're trying to push, I think, their agenda forward. I don't think they're just sitting around.
Yeah.
Okay, let's come out of this because I want to say something. He said they all seem to be in for Joe Biden. Maybe there are recent rumblings when it comes to Gavin Newsom that may not necessarily be the case. We're going to get to that in just a second because I believe these two stories are connected. And I want to bring up this article here from The Guardian that says Obama reportedly warns Biden over strength of Trump 2024 challenge. Report says ex-president made comments at private White House lunch in June. I guess it's not so private now. But pledged to do all he could for re-election bid. Barack Obama has reportedly warned Joe Biden about how strong a challenge Donald Trump will be in the second election battle in 2024. Should Trump win the Republican nomination next year as expected, polling now shows Trump and Biden closely matched for a second presidential contest. At a private White House lunch with Biden in June, Obama also promised to do all he could to help the presidency get re-elected. And I think we all know what that means. It'll be time for Obama to make some more phone calls. Ring, ring, ring. Marianne, I'm going to need you to sit this one out. RFK, I'm going to need you to sit this one out. Dr. West, you're a beloved scholar, but I'm going to need you to sit this one out. So Obama will play his role as he has before. He goes on to say, there we go. The Post said Biden welcomed the offer of help from the man under whom he was vice president between 2009 and 2017. Biden, the newspaper said, is eager to lock down promises of help from top Democrats, among whom Obama is easily the biggest star for what is likely to be a hard-fought re-election race. Trump faces unprecedented legal jeopardy, including 78 criminal charges over hush money payments, retention of classified information, and his attempt to overturn Biden's yada yada. We know how YouTube is. He is expected also to face election subversion charges in Georgia, but his grip on the Republican primary has only tightened with each legal reverse. In Republican polling, Trump enjoys leads of more than 30 points over his nearest rival, hard right governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. 30 points. That is how unlikable Ron DeSantis is. Trump has all these charges and he's that far ahead of him. In 2020, Biden beat Trump by more than 7 million ballots and conclusively in the Electoral College, a result Trump refused to accept, stoking chaos culminating in the deadly U.S. Capitol attack. Biden and Obama's relationship has been the subject of widespread reporting and speculation, not least over whether Obama thought Biden should mount a third run for the Democratic nomination in 2020. As the U.S. Senator of Delaware, Biden crashed and burned in the primaries of 1988 and 2008, the latter won by Obama, 19 years Biden's junior. The two men then formed an effective partnership through 8 years of power. But now, in recent news, it appears that Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom have agreed to debate each other. Now, why do I feel these two stories are connected? Because I just find it pretty interesting that it is reported that Obama had that discussion with Joe Biden. Just a warning, I think Trump could win in 2024. And now we see Gavin Newsom kind of coming out of the shadows again after that interview he had with Sean Hannity, that he is willing to debate Ron DeSantis. Now, last time I checked, Ron DeSantis is running for president. Gavin Newsom, not so much. Or is he? Let's go into this clip here from Sean Hannity about this debate opportunity with Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom. And I want to show you how this was proposed in the first place. It was actually Sean Hannity who brought up this idea to Gavin Newsom.
You might remember earlier this year, I interviewed California Governor Gavin Newsom not that long ago. I floated the idea of a policy-based debate, red versus blue, red state versus blue state, between Gavin Newsom and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Here's a friendly reminder. I'll say, Governor Newsom, Governor DeSantis, economy. That's the only word I'm going to throw out.
Love it.
You, minute, then you go at it. Next topic.
Right.
And I'll moderate it that way, and you have my word, I'll moderate it that way.
I'm all in. Count on it.
You would do a 2-hour debate with Ron DeSantis.
I make it 3.
So why would Gavin Newsom agree to do that if he's not even... what's that noise? Uh-oh, hold on. Okay, I don't know what that was. That was very weird. But why would Gavin Newsom agree to do that if he's not running for president? What does he have to gain for this? Or maybe he's thinking about running for president in 2028. Let's continue.
Wow. That would be, how many of you would like to see that? Would you like, okay. Now, this would be a debate that highlights what are major political and philosophical divides in this country. Why is there mass immigration from blue states to red ones? How do you reconcile a lot of these issues that are so important? States with high income tax rates against states that have low income tax rates or none at all, like in the case of Florida. What's the difference between a sanctuary state and states that actually respect immigration laws? What about the issue of America? Should we remain energy independent or restrict the use of fossil fuels altogether? Now, Vice President Harris recently turned down the opportunity to debate Governor DeSantis. Gavin Newsom says he's not only open to it, he'll do it.
And that's what tells me that Kamala Harris is out. If we're talking about someone running a shadow campaign or someone possibly trying to replace Joe Biden, that right there tells me Kamala Harris is out. Because if she has decided not to have a debate with Ron DeSantis, but Gavin Newsom has agreed to it, then that tells me that the Democratic Party has chosen Gavin Newsom to possibly come in and replace Joe Biden. Let's continue.
Now we ask Governor DeSantis. We welcome him back to the program. Governor, how are you? Good. Thanks for having me. Great to have you. All right. You heard Gavin make the offer. Your answer is?
Absolutely. I'm game. Let's get it done. Just tell me when and where. We'll do it. And here's the thing, Sean. I mean, in one respect, the debate between California and Florida, has already been had, as you suggest. People have been voting on that. They've been voting on it with their feet. They have fled California on record.
Let's stop here for just a second. I'll go back a little bit. So this is something that I mentioned earlier on Rising this morning. I don't think this debate is going to go well for Gavin Newsom if Ron DeSantis focuses on the economy. If he focuses on the economy. If he starts to get into culture war issues, that's a wrap, which is what he's running on for the most part, which is the reason why I don't think he's polling as well as he thought he would. But if he focuses on the economy, this could bring problems for Gavin Newsom. And I want to give a couple examples. California has the largest homeless population in the country. California, if you look at the top 10 states that people are fleeing, which he just brought up, people leaving the states, California's number one. People are leaving California and they're moving to states like Texas and Arizona. I can't make this up, right? So that is also causing another problem because now these states like Texas and Arizona, there's an influx of people coming from places like California, and that is actually increasing the cost of living in those states. You can't outrun cost of living. This is something that I stress heavily in reference to gentrification. When people say, oh, they'll just have to move somewhere else, as long as more people are moving somewhere else, the cost of living is going to increase there as well. Ask people who live in places like Austin, Texas, how that's working out. And their homeless population is increasing. So those are a couple issues. The other issue, if you look at the housing wage, meaning what you need to earn to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, just an apartment. Now, this is going off of that cost of living report we've discussed on this show for 2023. California is number one. In California, according to the cost of living report, you have to earn at least $42.25 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment on average in California. So if Ron DeSantis goes into this debate and focuses on the economy, oh, Gavin Newsom is done. So I don't know why he agreed to this other than the fact that they are considering him to run because Joe Biden's doing so poorly. Let him finish here.
Been had, as you suggest. People have been voting on that. They've been voting on it with their feet. They have fled California in record numbers. Florida has been the number one state for net in-migration. We have the number one ranked economy, number one now in education, crime rate at a 50-year low. But in another sense, this is the debate for the future of our country, because you have people like Joe Biden. They would love to see the Californication of the United States.
That's a lie. Joe Biden is corporate. Joe Biden doesn't even want to give everybody health care. That's an exaggeration. Such an exaggeration. This guy is so not likable.
Biden may not even be the nominee. You could have Gavin Newsom. You could have Kamala Harris. And I think if we go down that direction, that's going to accelerate American decline. We can't see America decline anymore. We need to reverse American decline.
So if he focuses on those economic issues, he could win this debate. Afeni's in the chat. Afeni says Gavin Newsom is going to appeal to younger normie Dems, and that's why they are elevating him. I believe that. I could see that happening. There's another thing, too. I don't know if people heard about this, but Gavin Newsom has been on record saying he agrees with Medicare for all. But, some people say they agree with it. That don't mean they really want it to happen. That doesn't mean they're actually going to try to implement it. But he's gone on record recently saying he agrees with Medicare for all, and he agrees with public banks in California. So apparently he is one of the people that has said, yes, let's put up the public banks. Let's go ahead and go for it. Be careful, because remember, he's corporate. So what you have now, because of that progressive movement, now you have corporate Democrats calling themselves progressive, agreeing with certain progressive ideas, even though they never intend to actually implement them in principle. So just be careful. He's one of those people they could bring into especially younger voters.
Let me ask you, because I know this issue of African-American curriculum came up, and my understanding is that you had a panel of predominantly African-American scholars build out the history of slavery, African-American history in the country. And you were attacked by Kamala Harris over that. And am I wrong in my understanding that these were predominantly, this curriculum was put together by African-American scholars predominantly?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the leaders was the former chairman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Kamala is lying, saying somehow these black scholars designed a curriculum to try to say there was somehow good with slavery. That is not true. They showed the injustice of slavery. They told all the stories throughout all of American history, including black history. And she's trying to demagogue it to score political points. But Sean, we fight back against that. We do not bow down to the media mob. We don't bow down to the left when they are trying to demagogue and lie about things that are going on in the state of Florida. So I've stood up for those black scholars. I thank them for their job, and they did a good job.
Okay, let me just come in here and say something. I'm really getting tired of people referring to people like Kamala Harris as left. The Democratic Party is not left. So they kill me with this. And I think Ron DeSantis is smart enough to know this. He went to Yale, right? I think he's smart enough to know that. But they're not left. But what's interesting about that comment that he made there in reference to the curriculum is that even African-American Republican politicians are against it. They've come out on record against it, that even they don't agree with what Ron DeSantis has done in Florida. Now, in reference to this debate, let's go on to this article here from the New York Times. Ron DeSantis accepts Gavin Newsom's challenge to debate on Fox News. The California governor had taunted his Florida counterpart for months. Now, with his presidential campaign struggling, Mr. DeSantis agreed to a debate hosted by Sean Hannity. So again, this could be another way for Ron DeSantis to get more points, to increase his polling if he performs well. Gavin Newsom, they both look silly in these pictures. Gavin Newsom looks like he should be on a soap opera. Like sands through the hourglass. These are the days of our lives. So I want to get started with this point here. Mr. Newsom has made no secret of the fact that he is interested in running for president, perhaps as soon as 2028. And Mr. DeSantis' own presidential campaign is being drowned out by the inescapable presence of former President Donald Trump, who led him by more than 35 percentage points in a recent New York Times Siena College poll. This is crazy. Both Mr. DeSantis and Mr. Newsom have sought to present themselves as the platonic ideal of a governor for their party and their state as a haven. Mr. DeSantis has moved Florida sharply to the right, signing laws that ban abortion after 6 weeks, restrict transgender rights, and advertising his rejection of public health measures during the pandemic. Mr. Newsom has signed extensive climate measures sought to make California a sanctuary for abortion access for people from out of state, and recently called for a constitutional amendment to enact gun regulations. From the perspective of the current presidential race, though, Mr. Newsom is not exactly the sparring partner Mr. DeSantis would prefer. The man he actually needs to defeat to have a chance of becoming president, Mr. Trump, is threatening to skip the Republican debate this month. Very interesting, very telling times, right? Especially considering that even Trump doesn't even want to debate. Everyone's trying to get out of it. Everyone's trying to get out. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys. Thank you. That helps me with the algo. But this is really interesting. I don't know what's going to happen here. It'll probably get a lot of ratings. It'll be really good for Fox, right? It'll probably be good for DeSantis if he does well. That might help him in the polls. But just be prepared next year. 2024 is going to be wild. So just be prepared if you see Gavin Newsom just kind of pop up, just refer back to this moment. Just refer back to this moment. Going to go to some of the comments. Thank you for this, Roger. George Wallace in 68 was the last third party to win electoral college votes. That's interesting. Thank you, Mary. Sabby, it's more like they're priming Newsom to slide in place of Harris to become president via replacing Biden based on medical reasons. Ding, 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 ding. They could do that. They could let Joe Biden go through the entire, debate, all of that. And then after he wins, say, okay, I'm going to resign because of medical reasons. And Gavin Newsom's going to slide in. We don't know. We don't know. Thank you, Todd. Florida homeowners insurance has doubled in the last 2 years, and most companies won't write new policies. It's no paradise here either. Just saying. Yeah, I hear you. Hurricanes are rough. The hurricanes are rough. I hear you. Cheaper than California, though. I'll go ahead and take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Because one of the biggest problems that I've seen, most people that I know that have moved to California, I don't know anyone that has been able to afford to buy a house in California, by the way. Not one. But everyone I know that's moved to Florida has bought a home. Thank you for the tip, Roger. Oh, Sabby, you have to peep this real quick. Updated in last 30 days. Once you scroll down the chart, place the mouse pointer within the chart, then scroll. When you see top of chart, you will say both these governors will have nothing to brag about, canceling each other out. Then compare who is fifth from the bottom. I can check that out later. Thank you. But yeah, it'll be really interesting. And you said I missed one? Oh, thank you, Rob. Thanks for having Garland on, Sabby. Always learning from that man. Yeah, Garland is awesome. Okay. This next story that we're about to get into is wild. And I mean wild, wild. There were a couple of you, I don't know if you guys all decided to do this together, but there were a couple of you that emailed me this story. When I first saw it, I was like, there's no way this is true. So it took me a while. I wanted to do a little bit of digging and see, is this real? And believe it or not, it's actually real. It appears that in Louisville, Kentucky, the hospitals have been dumping patients. And I don't mean dropping them off at their house or their apartment. I mean dumping the patients. You see this? I'll make this bigger. Because it's local news, I can't play the video because I'll get copyright. But you see this picture, right? This is a patient dumped on the side of the road. Reports of hospitals dumping patients in downtown Louisville. Jesus Christ. I really couldn't believe this at first. And I'll make this larger because I don't know if it'll let me make it larger. The font is so small. Okay. This story began December 1st at 5 p.m. with a phone call to our newsroom from a horrified university hospital employee. The employee claimed security had just wheeled an elderly woman all the way out to the corner of Hancock and Ali, just off hospital property, dumped the woman out of the wheelchair on the sidewalk and left. Hospitals. I've been to Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville probably had one of the cleanest downtowns I've seen, out of the cities that I've been to. But it was also very clear that there was a section of Louisville that was very poor. You see that coming into the city. And this to me, let me go on. This story just drove me crazy. Minutes later, we shot video of her still in her soiled hospital gown and slippers, breathing hard under a blanket placed over her in 36-degree weather. Her stuff was in a bag next to her. So just keep in mind, it does snow in Kentucky. It's in the mountains. Louisville's in the mountains, like, or the hills, excuse me. They call them the hills. Like, this is insane. So essentially, you just have a hospital van or ambulance just opening up the door and just dumping patients off on the sidewalk. This sounds like a movie. The caller claimed she saw this a lot. So I started watching, and on December 16th at 7 p.m., 35 degrees outside, I recorded 3 security officers or guards surrounding an elderly woman with a walker and slowly escorting her out of the emergency room. She couldn't move fast. It took several minutes to make it all the way to the same corner of Hancock and Ali. After they had her across the street off the hospital property, the security guards turned around and went back. When they cleared, I caught up to her. She said she couldn't breathe. They told me I would not stay on the premises. Were you there as a patient? I asked. I needed to be a patient because I'm sick, she said. What is wrong with you? I asked. I've got COPD. I got diabetes. So they won't treat you. The doctor told me for 1 minute. And who told you what? And told you what? That I had to leave. What was the reason they gave? He didn't give me a reason. She told me she was homeless. What this sounds like to me is that basically they're dumping patients or refusing not to treat patients that don't have health insurance. That's what it sounds like. It goes on to say, I've got to go because I'm hurting, I'm in pain. Matthew Harbour and his mother claimed a similar story. They met us in front of Wayside Christian Mission in the spot where they said he was dumped in October. If anybody is watching and you live in Louisville or in the Louisville area and you knew about this, let me know in the chat, because this is crazy. I was in a car crash, Matthew said. I completely shattered my hip and pelvis. I got like 30 some screws. They said we can't find a rehab right now, Linda Harbour said. She said when Norton Hospital told her they had a room lined up for Matthew at Wayside, she checked it out. I called Wayside just to confirm, and they said, no, we can't do that. We can't, Linda said. We have beds and help find jobs, but we don't take medically needy people. We don't do that. What the hell do they mean by medically needy people? It's a hospital. She said she then had a conference call with the hospital staff. The social worker said, we're going to take him to a shelter. Which one? And they said, Wayside Christian Mission. And I said, well, I know that's not true because I called them and they don't take them. Then the social worker said, that's history. We'll think of something else. Linda said the next day, her son was unloaded from a transport vehicle on the curb in the rain on Jackson Street in front of Wayside. This is criminal. You can't stay here. We can't treat you. You're medically needy. So we're just going to drop you off on the sidewalk. Jeez Louise. I thought they've dumped my son. My garbage I have to put out on the curb. That's how they dumped my son, Linda said, like garbage. Linda said she was in no shape to care for him at home. She died after the interview with us. They put all their stuff on the sidewalk over there, dump them off on the sidewalk, get back in their vehicle, and get out here just as fast as they can. Now, that's coming from a Wayside staffer, Perry Lane. Lane helped Matthew out of the rain that day and said he witnessed the same kind of thing dozens of times a year from hospitals as far away as Eastern Kentucky. This is Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul's state, no? Where are they on this matter? He said they're often lied to about the medical treatment they'll receive at the shelter. What's the worst physical shape you've seen someone who was dumped? I asked. This guy said, this guy here was pretty bad, Lane said, mentioning Matthew. He was paralyzed. People that can't walk, totally reliant on a wheelchair. Hospitals take them out, put them in a wheelchair, throw all their stuff on the street, and take off. Wayside's chief operating officer, Nina Mosley, told me it's not uncommon. She said they're not trained medically, and sometimes they take patients right back to the hospitals. How can you dump people? Lane said, these are human beings. How can you just dump them and leave them? It doesn't make any sense to me. It's inhumane, man. We detailed these incidents with dates and times and sent them to both Norton and University hospitals. Norton Healthcare Senior Vice President Renee Murphy responded in an emailed statement. In order to safeguard the privacy of patients and in compliance with HIPAA, we are not permitted to discuss specifics regarding a patient's case. With that being said, there are several details to this case that may not have been communicated to you by the family. As Mr. Harbour has not signed a HIPAA release of information form, which authorizes us to speak to you about his care, we will not be able to share those details with you. That's from Norton Healthcare. And University Hospital Public Relations Director David MacArthur replied in an emailed statement, U of L Health goes through extraordinary efforts to ensure all people that seek medical assistance are treated with compassionate, innovative, patient-centered care. Is it compassionate to dump people off on the sidewalk? What is heartbreaking for U of L Health staff is that we often encounter situations where patients need assistance beyond medical care. So they just drop you off. As the community safety net hospital, the challenges are particularly even more acute when providing health care to the unhoused population of Metro Louisville. As a healthcare provider, we treat medical conditions, but some of our patients need much more. Our team routinely offers additional resources to assist with housing, transportation, and ongoing care. It is part of their training and our expectations. However, community resources are limited, and even when they are available, many individuals that may benefit from those resources still refuse assistance. Still doesn't explain to me why you are dumping people on the sidewalk. That still has not been explained. Regardless of U of L Health recognizes and complies with the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, every individual presenting to any of our emergency departments is medically screened. If they have an emergency medical condition, they are treated, regardless of insurance or ability to pay. In response to your question, based on the location and the uniforms of the security personnel in the screenshots from December 16th, they appear to be working on behalf of the U of L hospital. Unfortunately, the images that were provided by Wave do not reveal enough information to track down details or identify whether the individuals on either day sought care from any of our team. Seriously? The Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act was passed in 1986 as a federal anti-dumping law. It mandates patients who present to a hospital emergency department must undergo an appropriate medical screening examination by a physician to determine whether they have an emergency medical condition. If they do, they must be stabilized and treated, and an appropriate transfer may take place to another facility with adequate capabilities. Does the transfer require you dumping them on the ground and throwing their clothes on the side of the street? It seems like to me, this transfer, the piece that did not happen, is that they're supposed to remove the patient from the van and bring them into the facility with their belongings, not just dumping them on the street like a piece of trash. This is cruelty and abuse, especially for someone who was paralyzed. If they do, they must be stabilized and treated, and an appropriate transfer may take place to another facility with adequate capabilities. Juries take the obligation to treat emergency patients very, very seriously, says Hans Popp. Popp knows that firsthand. He won a $2.3 million patient dumping verdict, most of that in punitive damages after his client, who was coming to a Lexington hospital by ambulance with a cardiac emergency, was turned away and directed to another hospital. Juries don't like to punish hospitals. There aren't many verdicts in Kentucky history favoring plaintiffs in alleged patient dumping cases. Isn't that a damn shame? In one of them, a $1.5 million verdict was awarded in Fayette County to a difficult patient with a history of ER visits, dumped by a hospital, rolled outside in a wheelchair with taxi fare, and hours later, the man was dead of an untreated ulcer. After being reversed on appeal, another jury socked the hospital for $1.445 million. What that tells you is if a jury hears a case and they believe there has been a violation where a patient has been dumped or abandoned by the hospital, they get really upset. It's like, I'm worthless, man, says Matthew. We're throwaway. We're garbage, you know? Pass this story on to as many people possible. I don't think a lot of people know about this story. Like I said, if it wasn't for you guys sent this story to me. That's how I found out about it. But other than that, I would have never known. And one last part here. I was contacted by a law enforcement officer who worked off duty at a university hospital who said she emailed the U of L Health CEO, Tom Miller, on March 1st about this issue and what she was witnessing. She said she was then informed she would no longer be working there. You see how that works? She complained about it and now she's gone. She lost her job. I asked U of L about that. They said the officer was concerned about the same things they are, and they're collaborating to increase community resources for the at-risk populations. As for the officer being let go after the March email, U of L said she was employed by a third-party security service. This is happening right here in the United States. Where are the politicians in reference to this? Where are all these people? Where's Mitch McConnell? Where's Rand Paul? This is how they treat people in this country. That is disturbing. Again, for those of you just joining, I'll go back up to the top of the article. That's freaking crazy. In Louisville, Kentucky, some hospitals are dumping patients on the side of the street. What a mess. What a mess. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Sab, I'm a member of the Public Banking Institute. You must watch Newsom. One of my fellow members told me that Newsom put a poison pill in the California public bank bill that he signed into law that required FDIC membership, which is unnecessary because a public bank is its own DIC, tying public banks in California to Wall Street. So what that means is that California public banks wouldn't be able to insure the hundreds of millions of taxes like it's supposed to. Interesting. I knew there had to be a catch, but only up to $250K in taxes instead. Voters can correct this with the CBI. Californians, if Newsom just said he'd sign Medicare for all into law, then no other time than now is your chance to put heat on him to pass it. That's right. That's right. And thank you for the tip, Dave. Appreciate the hell out of Sabrina's story, charisma. Good shout of luck to Sabby and Eric. Thank you. And I'm sorry I didn't finish your comment here, Roger. Put the heat on him to pass CalCare, California version of the New York Health Act. Americans not in California hold this over his head when he comes at us with this old BS. Thank you so much for that information, Roger. Teresa said, what if Mitch McConnell got dumped? Exactly. Yikes, man. And thank you for the super chat, Mary. Oh, it's the norm in California too. What? You guys have got to tell me more about this. Like, I had no idea this was happening. I never heard about this. And this is crazy. What do you do if you see someone just dump a patient off on the street like that? This country, man. And we have another wild story before we get to the Max Blumenthal story. This one has been requested multiple times, and I finally remembered to cover the story. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what happened to Travis King. Travis King is a U.S. soldier. For whatever reason, while he was in South Korea, he decided to dash across the borderline between South Korea and North Korea, and he was detained in North Korea. This is another bizarre story. Many are trying to figure out why he would just do that. What does his family say? How do they feel about this position? Do they think he did this on his own? Witnesses have said that he did, but why would he do it, knowing as a U.S. soldier, you would be detained in North Korea? Was there something that drove him to run across that border? Let's go ahead and get started with this clip here, and then we're going to hear a response from his family. This is another story that is just bizarre to me.
Family of a U.S. soldier who crossed into North Korea last week is now begging American officials to fight for his safe return. U.S. officials Monday said that they are working to contact North Korea through the UN. The country has given very few details about the discussions so far. Travis King joined a tour group visiting the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea and apparently sprinted across the border. It is not clear why he did this. In the week and
let's pause here. I'll show you that picture right here. So you can see him here. Okay.
Apparently sprinted across the border. It is not clear why he did this. In the week and a half since, King is believed to have been detained by North Korea. I want to bring in Ian Hurd, the director of the Weinberg College Center for International and Area Studies at Northwestern. Ian, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Ian, right now, there's no word on the fate of Travis King. His family says that his impulsive move to dash over the border was uncharacteristic of him. At this point, what is top of mind for you about this? What is the most concerning thing?
Well, it's an incredibly sad case. What he's done is sort of ostentatiously dangerous, and he'll be really lucky if he gets out alive. He's also put the American government in a really tough spot because the U.S. doesn't have a whole lot of tools for bringing people back from North Korea, since the North Korean government has such a closed attitude towards relations with the outside.
I mean, you say
the only tool that I can think of that can bring him out of North Korea is Dennis Rodman. And I'm not trying to be funny, but Dennis Rodman does have that relationship with North Korea. He's been there multiple times. He's the only person that I can think of that can get Travis to come back to the US. But in reference to government officials, probably not. Let's continue here. So it says, who is the detainee in North Korea custody? He's 23 years old. He's a U.S. Army private, second class. He's from Racine, Wisconsin. He joined the Army in January 2021, and he served 47-day sentence in South Korea prior to entering North Korea. We'll get into that a little bit more as well.
he'll be lucky if he gets out alive. Tell us more about that.
Well, the North Korean government has made a long-term strategy of basically using anxiety that it can create in the outside world as its tool of foreign policy. So it uses every opportunity it can to try to create fear and discomfort among outsiders, and uses that to try to extract concessions from the US and other governments. So I would imagine that they'll be using this fellow as a tool in that game, and whatever they can do to make his situation worse, they will see as a virtue, because it might increase their leverage relative to the US government.
Yeah, and we can't help.
I want to answer outside Steeler fan. Why was he in North Korea? He was in South Korea, but he sprinted across the border to North Korea. We don't know why. But this is really scary.
But think about Otto Warmbier, the American student who was held by North Korea, who was in such bad physical and mental condition. He died within days of finally being released. How does being held by North Korea compare with a country like Russia that we see in the headlines all the time? How concerned should Travis's family be?
Well, I think I'm sorry to say that they should be extremely concerned, but we don't know very much at all about the thinking inside the North Korean government, and there's very little publicly available information. I think what the US government is doing now is probably the best strategy, and that is to keep things really quiet. I think the National Security Council is working full tilt behind the scenes to try to get information, but by not amplifying the anxiety, the U.S. is doing a very good job to try to get him home safely.
You know, we've heard about prisoners in Russia so much recently. North Korea, you touched on this earlier, is...
Did you guys notice the propaganda? Notice how they had to mention Russia when this has nothing to do with Russia? It's like any chance, any opportunity that they get, let's throw Russia in here as well. Like they didn't have to. This situation took place in North Korea, not in Russia, but they found a way to include that.
Complicated in a different way, obviously led by Kim Jong-un. Tell me more about this leader. Why is working with him and his government so complicated?
The government there for decades now has been running essentially a gigantic social experiment of trying to run a government in a kind of autarkic dictatorship that's not working. It's starving the people, but they keep doing it because they have the power to keep themselves in office. So it's a little bit like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia in the 1970s, a giant failed social experiment, but the people at the top keep running it and everybody else suffers from it. So it's a very closed system, and that makes King's situation much worse than somebody in Russia, simply because the Russian prison system is a little more transparent, horrible as it is. So the North Korean security apparatus is so tightly closed as to be almost impenetrable to at least the public eye.
I'm sorry. It's just the amount of propaganda, how they found a way to bring up Russia multiple times. Now, the family did speak out. They are very concerned, as you could imagine. They're basically have said, like, this is very unusual behavior of Travis, that he wouldn't react this way. Now, I'm going to say a couple of things, okay? Coming from a military family, I grew up around military like most of my life. And I am wondering if something happened to him after he enlisted. I don't know. Maybe there was some type of abuse. Maybe there was some type of mistreatment. I'm wondering if something happened to him while he was overseas, and him running across the border to North Korea was almost as if he was running away from something. And that's what I'm wondering. Or it could be maybe he had a mental break. We don't know. There could be a mental health issue or underlying mental health issue that maybe was not diagnosed. Don't know. But I want you to hear from the family what they had to say about this situation.
Are exclusive with the family of Travis King, the American soldier who's being held in North Korea after running across the border from South Korea. Chief Global Affairs anchor Martha Raddatz has the story. Good morning, Martha.
Good morning, George. The big question, of course, this morning, why would anyone, especially an American soldier, cross into North Korea? It is the same question his family has, but they just want him back.
I can't function. I can't think straight. It feels like I'm in a big nightmare.
This morning, the mother of missing U.S. Army Private Travis King speaking out while her son in custody in North Korea.
Once nighttime comes, I start worrying more because I don't know what they're doing to him.
The 23-year-old soldier's family calling on the U.S. government to help bring him home. But this is not a typical case of detention. King was supposed to be on a flight back to the U.S. last month after serving 47 days in a South Korean jail for an altercation. But
yeah, so this is the piece that you need to know. He was in jail in South Korea because of an altercation. Now, whatever that altercation was, I don't know. But what's interesting to me is you'll hear the family proceed to say, when they go on to mention that this type of behavior, this is not who he is, it wasn't typical of him. Well, would they say the same about the altercation that caused him to end up in a South Korean jail? Like, that's the thing. So it's not like this just happened out of nowhere and this guy just took off. There was already an incident that happened prior to this. And after leaving that jail, to run off to North Korea. So I want to bring that up. I think that's important for people to know that he was in prison, in jail, in South Korea first. So just keep that in mind.
instead of boarding the plane, officials say King left the airport and joined a tour of the DMZ, the heavily fortified.
Okay, let's come back here because I interrupted, and this part is very important so you can understand what happened to him after that release.
King was supposed to be on a flight back to the U.S. last month after serving 47 days in a South Korean jail for an altercation. But instead of boarding the plane, officials say King left the airport and joined a tour of the DMZ,
He chose not to go back home. Now, this is the piece that I think is very important. When he was released, he was supposed to get onto the plane to come back to the U.S., but he left the airport. So again, was he running away from something? Why would he then choose not to return back home? Or was there something back home he didn't want to face? These are the things we need to include and think about when we're trying to figure out why he just decided to run off to North Korea out of all the places to go to, because you know you're not going to, as a U.S. soldier, you know you're not going to be treated well if you run over to North Korea. Obviously, they're going to detain you and they're not going to want to let you come back to the U.S. So to me, if I'm thinking about this from a psychological perspective, it gives me the feeling that he did not want to come back home. Let's continue. Let's go on a little bit. Sorry. Okay.
Plane, officials say King left the airport and joined a tour of the DMZ, the heavily fortified demilitarized zone that separates North and South Korea. King, pictured here dressed in black, moments before, officials say he bolted across the border on purpose, right into the custody of the North Koreans, and was driven away in a van, his family in disbelief.
That's not Travis. Travis would not just go over the border like that. He's the type of kid, he would have wanted to come home.
But what happened to him when he was in custody in South Korea that maybe makes him not want to come back home? Maybe something happened to him there, you know?
No, he knew just going across that border, it's basically just committing suicide.
King's family says he was struggling prior to his disappearance. His uncle telling ABC News, Travis said he was experiencing racism during his military deployment to South Korea, and that after he spent time in jail, the messages King sent to his family no longer sounded like him.
Pause right here. So these are the things coming from the family. They said he was struggling before his disappearance. They go on to say he was experiencing racism during military deployment. That's also like not uncommon, right? Sent messages to the family that did not sound like him. It almost seems to me there was some type of trauma. We don't know all the details, but they'll go on to explain at least one of the messages that they did receive to him. But it seems like there was some type of trauma.
After we hear about this fight and him going to jail, the messages became strange. And I was like, "You okay?" And then he's telling me, "No, they're trying to kill me." And then he just continued to send these songs and speaking to me, and he saying things like, said they're racist. I don't know, it made me seem like something was going on with him, like he was fearing for his life.
And his mother says she received a disturbing phone call in the middle of the night sometime.
So you guys heard that? He said that they were trying to kill him. Now, I don't know who they could be, other soldiers that were enlisted with him in his unit. I don't know. Could be civilians that he's referring to. I don't know. But it sounds like it might have been the people in the military. Let's continue. Let me go back just a little bit. Sorry.
His mother says she received a disturbing phone call in the middle of the night, sometime prior to Travis King crossing the border.
Like 3-something in the morning, I got a call from him. And I was half asleep, and he just called and he just screamed, "I'm not the Army soldier you want me to be. I'm not the Army soldier you want me to be." And he kept screaming that out loud. And then all of a sudden the phone hung up, and then they were taking him to the hospital.
King's family now.
You guys heard that? I'm not the Army soldier that you want me to be.
Sudden the phone hung up, and then they were taking him to the hospital.
King's family now searching for answers and trying to do anything they can to get him back. The administration says it is doing whatever possible to get Travis King back. It might be an encouraging sign that North Korea has acknowledged they are now holding him, but it could be a very long time before their so-called investigation is over.
Being in the military is not easy. And it can do things to you, you know. There are things that you may witness, things that you may experience that you'll never forget, especially if you have to go to battle. And he's 23 years old. And he was a private. One of the things that I can tell you is the lower the rank, the harsher they are on you. What's really interesting to me about that story, and I've watched several interviews, I've read multiple articles about that story. I have yet to see or hear from his unit. Where is the commanding officer? Why aren't they doing any interviews? Something to think about. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for the tip, Roger. Regarding the hospitals, let's put it all all on them, Sab. Democrat Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is up for re-election this year, but that opponent is Cameron, who is the current AG and I think is married to McConnell's niece or something, who threw Breonna Taylor under the bus. Both need to be held accountable. The governor needs to speak about Kentucky single payer, and Cam needs to do his job and prosecute, but Kentucky needs to be a CBI state. Well said, Roger. I'm going to go to some of the comments over here. Terry says, yes, Dennis Rodman, this may work. The only person I know that can probably help get him back. And thank you, Justin. Or maybe the DPRK isn't the dystopia the U.S. says. Curtis says, Sabby, I'm a veteran. I understand this all too well. The military has a huge mental health issue from bad work environment and a toxic ranking system. There you go. There's a movie you guys should watch if you want to hear about the toxic system of the military. Full Metal Jacket. You should watch that movie. We're now moving on to our final story. It was just a couple nights ago or so. We went through the interview that Jimmy Dore had with RFK Jr. And during that interview, he admitted that he would interview with Max Blumenthal. If you have forgotten, let's go back and revisit that. So here's Max Blumenthal saying, here's RFK Jr. saying, my reporting on Israel and Palestine needs to be questioned, and agreeing to a public dialogue with me on this issue. So for those who may have forgotten, let's dive in.
I love Max Blumenthal, but I do not think he's objective on Israel. I think his reporting on Israel is not, it needs to be questioned.
Okay, well, here's what I would ask. Just like, Peter Hotez ducked you and Joe Rogan, I would love, because Max is the guy to talk to about this, not me. So would you do an interview with Max, because he would be able to talk to you about this way better than I can. I'm really not good at this.
Yeah, I would love to talk to Max. I love Max Blumenthal.
Okay, so we all remember that. I'd love to talk to Max. So he was put on the spot there. Apparently shortly after that, and Max revealed this on Rising, but he has gone into more detail recently, so that'll be interesting. Apparently after that, things changed. Surprise. So Max tweeted this out a day after RFK Jr. agreed to Jimmy Dore's proposal to publicly discuss his pledge of unconditional support for Israel with me. His comms director was dialing me up to offer a series of unbelievable excuses for why this could not happen in the foreseeable future. Now, before I get into this article where he dives into this pretty deeply, I just want to show you this. She's pretty much blocked anyone who disagrees with his position on Israel and Palestine. And by blocked, I mean she is basically shielding RFK Jr. from outlets that do disagree with him on this particular issue. It's not just Max. And I know Max's story is getting a lot of attention because RFK Jr. was asked that publicly on Jimmy's show, but it's not just happening to Max. It's happening to a lot of us. And I've talked about this as well. Stephanie Spear is the comms director. I have also spoken to her via email. I've also spoken on the phone with other people that are a part of RFK Jr.'s campaign. They called me, by the way. And this is an issue. And so I'm going to go ahead and say this. Now, the title of this article, this is the Gray Zone article, RFK Jr. staff blocked Israel-Palestine dialogue after the candidate agreed. Neoliberal Tears pointed out something to my attention that I think needs to be said. Even though Stephanie Spear is the comms director, yes, she is part of the staff, and she is the one saying no. At the end of the day, she works for RFK Jr. So if he had issue with the way that she is performing, he can either ask her to change what she is doing, or he can replace her with someone else. But at the end of the day, she works for him. So keep this in mind. If this is something that RFK Jr. wants to do wholeheartedly, he can go around her and do it anyway, especially since he knows Max Blumenthal. They actually know each other. Now let's get into the article, and then I'm going to tell you the update that happened on Jimmy's show earlier. A day after RFK Jr. agreed to a public discussion with Max Blumenthal on Israel and Palestine, his campaign walked back his words. RFK Jr. has pledged unconditional support to Israel while spouting vitriolic anti-Palestinian rhetoric. So let's get into this. One day after Democratic presidential candidate RFK Jr. agreed to comedian and podcaster Jimmy Dore's proposal that he engage with the Gray Zone's editor-in-chief Max Blumenthal in a public dialogue on Israel and Palestine, Kennedy's campaign nixed the discussion. Nixed. It's big for you guys there. During an August 1st phone call with Gray Zone correspondent Liam Cosgrove, RFK Jr. campaign communications director Stephanie Spear declared Kennedy's not debating Max Blumenthal. He's not going to debate anyone. He's running for president. So essentially, this is similar to what happened between Joe Rogan, RFK Jr., and Peter Hotez. When Joe Rogan offered to moderate a debate between RFK Jr. and Peter Hotez, I called him Lab Coat Guy. RFK Jr. agreed to that discussion. Peter Hotez was like, yeah, I'll debate this guy on this, and then totally backed out. So he's now done the same thing. But according to Stephanie Spears, he's not going to debate anyone. But he publicly said he would debate Peter Hotez. Let's continue. She goes on to say, "You're not hearing me," she emphasized. "We're not going to do it, okay?" There are some gatekeepers sometimes in political spaces that are part of these campaigns where sometimes like you may have reached out to a candidate's team to interview them, and that candidate has no idea because the gatekeeper preventing that information from getting to the candidate. However, with RFK Jr., that doesn't seem to be the case. He knows. He knows. Let's continue. Hours after her call with Cosgrove, Spear contacted Blumenthal directly to explain that Kennedy would not agree to any public discussion with the Gray Zone editor until spring of 2024, once the first 5 primaries are over. You see this? The Gray Zone editor until spring of 2024, once the first 5 primaries are over. Now, why would that be the case? Because they don't want him to engage in a discussion that could potentially show that he doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to this particular issue and could hurt his campaign. That's what this is really about. Now, they had no problem. Stephanie had no problem with RFK Jr. going on to Breaking Point's multiple times. Had no problem with Crystal Ball pushing back on him in reference to the jab. Had no problem with RFK Jr. appearing on Rising multiple times. By the way, Bree had this discussion with him about Israel and Palestine on Rising. But for some reason, they do not want him to have this conversation with the gray zone. Very interesting. She offered Blumenthal an off-the-record phone conversation with the candidate as an apparent consolation. Off-the-record conversation. What are they so afraid of, guys? I'm supposed to believe that RFK Jr. is going to take on the CIA and he's going to take on the military-industrial complex, and he's afraid to talk to Max Blumenthal? Though Blumenthal never insisted on a formal debate, but rather a live interview, such as the ones Kennedy has granted popular media figures like Dorr, Glenn Greenwald, and Breonna Joy Gray, Speer repeatedly stated that the candidate would not debate anyone except the president of the United States until the first presidential primaries are over. You guys hear this? So let me tell you something. I told you I had already spoken to a member of his campaign who made it very clear to me that the woman who was always with him, the comms director, that's Stephanie, she's the one that makes the interviews possible. So even some of the people on his campaign team are having difficulty having a sit down with her. She's not just avoiding people on the outside, she's avoiding people as part of the campaign. That's how this works, ladies and gentlemen. We're hitting different demographics, and we're also hitting on different issues, Speer emphasized. So you know, it's really a strategy thing. And we want to debate President Biden. He's a Democratic candidate. That's what we're waiting for. So you can't give Max an interview? This June, however, Kennedy enthusiastically accepted podcaster Joe Rogan's offer to participate in a live debate with Peter Hotez, a pediatrician and one of the country's most precocious. Did I say precocious? Ferocious? Vociferious? Whatever, shoot. Of the jab. Rogan pledged to donate $100,000 to a charity of Hotez's choice if the doctor entered the octagon. Hotez, who provoked Rogan's challenge by accusing him and RFK of misinfo, invited widespread mockery and scorn when he refused to debate. But now RFK is refusing to engage on an issue that he recently placed at the heart of his campaign and which has shocked many supporters who believed he offered an alternative to the pro-war bipartisan consensus, his unconditional support for the state of Israel and its military conduct in the occupied Palestinian territories. It's one thing you publicly say on someone's show, yeah, I'll do it. And then right after that, the comms director says, yeah, it's not happening. Now, I do want to give you a recent update. Apparently, I watched the conversation between Max and Jimmy earlier before I went live. And on that show, Jimmy said that he received a text from RFK, and RFK said he will do it. He will talk to Max. But his communications director told Max no. And why is RFK not communicating with Max Blumenthal directly? Instead of putting Jimmy in the middle, why isn't RFK reaching out to Max and saying, I know what you heard, but I'll go ahead and do the interview. I do want to do the discussion with you. What is happening here? What kind of buffoonery is this? Like, honestly, at this point, and people do whatever they want. But at this point, if I was Max, I'd honestly look at RFK and say, fuck you. I wouldn't even want to have this discussion now. That's just me. Because I don't, you got three tries. Like with me, you got 3, that's it. You got 3. After that, I'm not even trying to reach out to you. No. Let's go on. During his conversation with Kennedy's communication director, Cosgrove challenged Speer on the candidate's sudden timidity. RFK goes on all these interviews and says that he wants to debate people. So I'm a bit confused about why he says that and you guys don't want to debate. Is it your decision or is it him saying that? It's the campaign's decision, Liam. That's coming from Stephanie. He did not ask for a debate with Max. She continued in an annoyed tone. So maybe re-listen to that. We're not going to debate. I don't know how many times I have to tell you that. Well, that seems quite rude. This is what's happening on his campaign team? There's a post here from Post-Duopolis. It says, and it shows that video where he agrees to debate. We showed that. He goes on to say RFK Jr. has sought to define himself as the strongest peace and freedom candidate in 2 decades while denouncing neocons and warmongers. At the same time, he has zealously defended the conduct of Israel's military and justified the country's decade-long occupation of Palestinians, even denying that any military occupation exists. Kennedy placed his Lukidnick views on Israel and Palestine at the forefront of his campaign message after being bombarded with accusations of anti-Semitism stemming from comments he made at a private July 14th event in New York City. Actually, I saw this as the forefront of his campaign message actually before that when he was in that parade. That was the first time I saw it, actually. Anywho, we know about what happened at that dinner. And be careful with that because you need no YouTube. This part here. When a New York Post reported who had been presented with the dinner published the candidate's comments, a maelstrom of manufactured outbursts forth from Kennedy's opponents with Democratic establishment, while the Biden White House and a host of Jewish pressure groups condemned Kennedy as an anti-Semite. A letter signed by 100 Democratic members of Congress likened him to Adolf Hitler. So that was when he had that private discussion, which was apparently not so private after all. And that was leaked. And he was saying that there were some people who would have an effect from the jab differently than others. I want to get into all of that. We got to be careful. Let's move on here. That's the weaponization committee. We've talked about that before. I want to go into let me see. Kennedy's escalated his warlike rhetoric during a July 23rd New York City event hosted by Shmuley Botek, a former reality show rabbi recruited by the late Likudnik oligarch Sheldon Adelson to advance the cause of greater Israel within the United States. Adelson was a top funder of Donald Trump's 2016 and 2020 campaigns. During a 20-minute long diatribe, and we interviewed the protesters, laden with anti-Palestinian venom and ultra-Zionist propaganda. Kennedy referred to hijabs as Habibs and pronounced Chechnya as though he had not heard of the place until moments before the event. While pledging to prevent any country in the Middle East from obtaining nuclear weapons as president, the candidate seemed unaware that Israel possessed a secret nuclear arsenal. And that was this video here.
I don't think I have ever heard a major American political figure express so kaleidoscopically support for Israel in the historical context as what we just heard. That was unprecedented.
And I don't know why RFK Jr. has aligned himself with this guy. This guy was on a reality TV show called Shalom in the Home. He also wrote a book about Michael Jackson after he died. He was connected to people like Michael Jackson. I feel like this guy just wants to be seen. I don't think it was a good idea for him to connect his campaign with him.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even have words. That a man who just said that could be called an anti-Semite. Honestly, I just don't have words. I mean, you're challenging an entire party right now to almost go back to the roots. So let's talk about that for a moment. What is your connection to Israel? What do you think about Israel? And what do you think about the Democratic Party's posture vis-a-vis Israel?
Grew up believing that the state of Israel was this extraordinary, blossom in the desert. It was an oasis of democracy, of values, of human rights in a massive sea of totalitarianism. And I made that assumption. I mean, I assumed that my children would feel the same way. I was shocked in recent years that my kids coming home from college had a very different narrative about Israel that they had picked up from their, from the Gestalt, from the milieu. And that narrative is the narrative that has been adopted in recent years by the Democratic Party, which sees Israel as an occupying nation, an imperium, oppressing indigenous Palestinians. And
why would you be shocked by that? See, this is the thing to me that realized that he really was not doing his research.
As you know, as a racist state and an apartheid state. And, part of my campaign is going to be a major piece of it is going to be explaining to American citizens why that view is wrong and making them.
It's terrible. Like, this is terrible.
Moral case for Israel. Israel, as you know, is the only place in the Mideast where there's freedom of expression for all citizens.
No, it's not. Well, I'm not going to play this whole thing. It's not for all people. It's for certain people. It's definitely not for the Palestinians. They don't even have freedom to walk around in certain parts of the country. Anyhow, going on, as Shmuley nodded along, Kennedy launched a full-throated defense of the Israeli army's brigade-size invasion of the occupied Palestinian city of Jenin, during which it bombed buildings with fighter jets and ran bulldozers through the middle of its refugee camp. He referred to the entire city as a bomb factory, justifying the invasion because, in his words, virtually 100% of the people there are supporting terrorism. According to Kennedy, everybody in Jenin is involved in bomb making. There are no civilians there at all. Therefore, all are legitimate targets. He did not seem to know that the Palestinian campaign of suicide bombing ended well over 15 years ago, or that Israel's primary concern in Jenin was with the proliferation of armed militias defending their territory from settler and military incursions. The half-baked Hasbara escalated from there, as Kennedy cited Richard Kemp, a former British Army officer who subsists on Israel lobby speaking fees, to claim the conduct of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, when they go into Palestinian territories is beyond anything in the world. He even insisted that Israel's policy is to avoid civilian casualties, ignoring the moonscapes it created out of entire neighborhoods from Gaza to Beirut. And what's really interesting to me is that RFK Jr. has had this discussion with multiple people. RFK Jr., could have had this discussion with multiple people that he's already spoken to. He could have had this discussion with Kim Iverson, who was actually there at the Gaza Strip. Max Blumenthal was at the Gaza Strip. There are other people who have reported on this issue for years. And I just feel like you can't say, I'm running for president, but I'm not going to talk to people about this issue. You can't do that. And I don't know what the switch up strategy is that they're trying to do, but telling people that you're going to talk to them on someone's show and then the comms director contacting them and telling them, no, we're not going to do it. That's not a good look. I hope that's not part of the strategy. This part right here. During his live interview with Kennedy on Jimmy Dore show, the comedian challenges unconditional support for Israel. You don't even give America unconditional support, Dore reminded the candidate. Kennedy responded with a recitation of the same Zionist talking points he spouted while seated next to Shmuley. Among the litany of easily debunked claims Kennedy rattled off was that the U.S.-funded Palestinian Authority, which coordinates directly with the Israeli government, pays bounties for the killings of Jews anywhere on the planet. Yeah, that was a big one. That was a big one. Jesus. It's bad. Next, during the cliched and clumsy attempt at chronicling Israel's miraculous survival, Kennedy falsely claimed that following the 1967 war, Syria got the Golan Heights and the Sinai back once it recognized Israel's right to exist. In fact, the Golan Heights is still illegally occupied by Israel and is home of a settlement, Trump Heights, named for the U.S. president who pledged to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the area. See, this is the stuff that, like, some of the things that he's saying, it's just, where is he getting the information from? And here's an example here where it says, as for the Sinai Peninsula, Egypt liberated its territory from Israel's occupation through a surprise military campaign in 1973. And you'll see the picture here. Trump Heights, Israel approves plan for occupied Golan settlement. Wow, man.
נתחיל היום צעדים מעשיים להעלות את היישוב רמת טראמפ ברמת הגולן, שעל הריבונות שלה בידי ישראל הכיר הנשיא טראמפ.
Well. Jeez. It's like, did he look up any of this information before he said? Trump signed an executive order in March 2019, recognizing it as Israeli territory. You guys see that? Oh, man. That's why I'm just like, and then there's one other part I want to show you here. Again, this is where it says, I love Max Blumenthal, but I do not think he's objective on Israel. His reporting on Israel, it needs to be questioned. And then Dore responded, okay, here's what I ask. Just like Peter Hotez ducked you and Joe Rogan, I would love, because Max is the guy to talk to about this, not me. Would you do an interview with Max? Because he would be able to talk to you about this way better than I can. Yeah, I would love to talk to Max, Kennedy said in a seemingly sincere tone. Within 24 hours, however, his communications director was frantically explaining why no such conversation will take place. And then you'll see, if we go back up towards the top, just the rhetoric that came from her. Listen to this. It's the campaign's decision, Liam. He did not ask for a debate with Max. So maybe re-listen to that. We're not going to debate. I don't know how many times I have to tell you that. Yikes. I don't know, man. That's just, but I'll just say this. At this point in time, and I do understand that Max does want to have this conversation with him, but in my opinion, I would just let it go at this point. You should not have to fight this hard to have a discussion with someone. And I think it's because like there are parts of his campaign, there are aspects of RFK Jr.'s campaign that Max does like and he has applauded. And maybe he feels like if he can get him to understand where he's wrong on this issue, then maybe that will make his campaign better. But here's my thing. I don't think RFK Jr. is going to change his position on this issue. I think it's too late. He's already got people attached to him and to the campaign that have this same view and want him to promote this view. So if he walks back now, that's not going to be good for his campaign. Either way, he's screwed. Put it this way. Either this way. But during that show, Jimmy did say that RFK Jr. texted him and said he will talk to Max Blumenthal. But again, like I said, that should be just have direct communication with Max Blumenthal. Just reach out to Max directly yourself and don't use someone else in the middle as the middleman. Because let me tell you what happens to the middleman. If shit don't work out, people come looking back at you. That's the thing. People come looking back at you like, I thought you said that he said that this was going to happen. That's why it's no fun being in the middle. And I'm speaking from experience. I'm speaking from experience. And people be like, can I talk to this person? Reach out directly to them. Because I don't know. I don't have time. Reach out directly to that person. But I don't know. We'll see. But if it were me, I'd just be like, bye. That's me though, man. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you, Roger, for the tip on Rockfin. Me, Lucy, and the gang heard similar stories when we protested AOC military recruitment in the South Bronx. Kids, how many times we got to tell you? Stop enlisting, especially if you are Black. Yeah, the military stories are crazy, man. And thank you for this as well. You won't debate Max. You will debate Joe. Well, he wasn't trying to debate Joe. He was trying to debate Peter. You won't debate Max. You will debate Joe. But the DNC said there will be no debate. So is Kennedy acting like Hotez by not debating, or is he acting like the DNC? A true Democrat you are, sir. Sabrina, if this is the end of the show, don't forget to show that chart from the previous message. Yeah, I have no access to that. I have no access to whatever you're trying to. If Eric can grab it, we'll grab it. But other than that, I can't grab it right now. But yeah, let me go to some of the comments here. Thank you, Eric. Have they learned nothing from Trump? Having balls, doubling down, and alpha male, the room is the winning strategy. Never back down. It always looks weak as fuck. Well, thank you for that, Eric. And thank you, ARJ. RFK Jr. will not debate any anti-Zionist, anti-supremacist, anti-apartheid, anti-colonial, anti-Semitic, Palestinian-loving Russian agents like Max Blumenthal. That's interesting. I thought RFK Jr. said he wanted to have unity. He wanted to bring people together across different sides. That means talking to people that you disagree with. I don't know why you call him a Russia agent. Sounds like propaganda. Queen says, great interview with Garland Nixon, Sabrina. Thank you. Thank you so much. And one more Rockfin. Okay. And thank you for this as well, Roger. Sab, don't forget, he is against direct cash payments to American freedmen and instead wants to lend us money that is owed to us instead. That is another thing, too. He all over the place. Using some damn business loans. We have a terrible history with banks and why we don't trust them. Just research the Friedman Baru Savings and Trust Company Bank. How you gonna lend me money on money you already owe me? That's a good point. That is a good point. And What do you want me to do here? Eric? Okay, I'm sorry. No. Yeah. So interesting stories tonight. Quick announcement. I will not be live this Sunday. I'm hitting the road. I'm going to the Jazz Festival in Newport. So I'm super excited. I haven't been in years, especially since like the pandemic. So I'm so pumped. I'm so exciting. I get so excited about that. And I get to see Herbie. I get to see Herbie Hancock, guys. Do 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 do. I can't do the robot voice too well. I was like, dude, do 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 do. Herbie and Talib Kweli, I think Talib, isn't it Talib Kweli? I think he's one of them too. Yes? No? I'll show you guys. Newport Jazz Festival was awesome, guys. I saw Bobby McFerrin there years ago. The Don't Worry, Be Happy guy, and Ravi Coltrane. So it's pretty cool. Newport Jazz lineup. I thought they had there's Herbie. So it's all weekend. But that's the Friday show. I think the headliner for Friday is Bradford Marcellus. Yeah, he's the headliner for Friday. I was going to show you who's coming Sunday. Wait, which day am I? Oh, yeah, I think it's Sunday. Yeah, it is Sunday. That's why I won't be here. Butcher Brown. Who else? Oh, she's awesome. India Owens in the Cookout. Oh, I missed that one. Who's it? Saturday, John Baptiste, Thundercat. I'm not really feeling the Saturday one. Like some of the newer jazz people, I'm not as into. Does that make sense? I'm not really a big fan of new music, like, to be honest. I was just gonna get to Sunday. Anyway, it's an all-day thing. I'm pretty sure you guys probably figured that out. Sunday, yeah, Sunday is Herbie. So there's Herbie Hancock, guys. So I'm gonna see him. And the other one I wanted to see was, Diana Krall. She's also really good. But where is it? These guys, the Soul Rebels, featuring Rakim and Talib Kweli. Yes, it's going to be fun. I'm pumped and excited. I'm ready to go. All righty. Thank you for the chat, Roger. The robot is saying rocket. Yeah, Roger knows Herbie. Ethel says Herb the Legend plus Diana. Yeah, man. Oh, Giovanni knows Diana Krall. Okay. You guys know some of them. Killier Gorgie says Krall kicks ass. Okay, you guys. Yeah. Bill says Rakim and Kweli. That is the hype. Yep. Oh, Jay says he likes Diana. Okay, we got some jazz people in the house that he likes Diana Krall. Where he says Krall is Canadian. Hey, we got some jazz peeps. Awesome. All right, guys, I am heading out. Please enjoy your weekend. Again, I'm not here Sunday. I'll be traveling, but I'll see you again on Tuesday. Other than that, keep up the fight, guys. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.